Right, hello, hello, hello. Welcome everybody to this little session. The background for this is that about a week and a bit ago, probably around Monday or Tuesday, I think it was last week, the ACCA kindly organised, they didn't call it an examiners conference, but in the old days, they used to be called examiners conferences. And it used to be really quite exciting. You know, I think I met my wife at an examiners conference, interestingly. But the examiners stand up and they talk about their papers and the tutors quiz them. So it's very personal. Obviously, COVID came along and pretty much destroyed that. And so there was it's a virtual conference. And so, obviously myself and all my FME colleagues, some of which spoke at the conference, we're interested in what our examiners say. Yeah. And so what I've decided to do straight away afterwards, pretty much immediately afterwards, is decide, well, okay, what are the implications for people doing APM? I mean, that's incredibly important, isn't it? Examiner, I mean, I was an examiner for the ACCA, as some of you know. I was the performance management examiner between 2007 and 2010. My nickname was Killer Cordwell, believe it or not. I used to have the reputation of setting hard questions. I didn't think that was very fair, but performance management then was very new and people just didn't understand what we were trying to do. Despite my best efforts, I used to write an awful lot of articles, a lot of which still exist and still are around. But what I decided to do was pass, my thoughts back to you people, the student. What does it matter? What has been said, and what are the implications for your study? Yeah, this is not designed, if you like, necessarily for revision, although of course revision for September, as this is being recorded on the 24th of July, is about to start for most people, but it's not intended for that. It's relevant if you're going to do this exam in December, or for that matter, into the future. Okay, so let's have a little look at what we're going to talk about. Just first of all, some of you will know who I am. I am a qualified accountant. I am an ex-ACCA examiner. I worked with Kaplan for a long time, 28 years. But I was self-employed. I became self-employed sometime around 2002, something like that. And I was the examiner in 2007 to 2010, I think. And then since then, I've pretty much been working on my own. I've done an awful lot of stuff for the ACCA, done some train the trainer programs. Bangladesh was a brilliant place. I really liked Bangladesh. It was fantastic. Pakistan and South Africa. But I've also I've done an awful lot of work in the Middle East. So Dubai, for example, Saudi Arabia, I've done a little bit of that. And South Africa. South Africa was amazing. They do like their meat in South Africa. I remember going to an evening barbecue, and basically salad and tomato was just a relish, and everybody else was eating the meat. But it just gives you an indication, I suppose, how accountancy, when you eventually pass this wonderful paper that you might be struggling with now, or you might be on now, what it can do for you. It can open up the world for you. You can go anywhere you like. Absolutely brilliant. And I've been a tutor a long time, therefore. I used to work for Stoy Hayward. You may not remember them. Somebody might remember them. Became BDO Stoy Hayward. I was an accountant like everybody else, but pretty much immediately after I qualified, I decided to become a tutor, and I've had some success in terms of pass rates, very good generally, and also we always like to emphasize our prize winners, don't we? Maybe that's a bit unfair, because these people are exceptionally bright. Dominic Gibson was exceptionally bright. He came first in the world, but I think I've had 3 world prizes in 2020, which is pretty decent given the number of students I actually teach, and I've got one coming up, I think, potentially. One of my students called Reese scored 88. Can you think about that? 88 in June. Oh, he's got to be close to a world prize. We're going to wait and see. We don't know yet. So I wish him all the success. I've become quite friendly with Reese, a really nice chap. Now, what are we going to talk about today, and how we're going to conduct ourselves? I have no problem if you want to unmute yourself to say something. That's not a major problem. You could equally put something in the chat panel. Yeah, so if you've got a question, just don't be shy, right? Don't be shy. There's no pressure here. It is all recorded, as I mentioned earlier. We are going to record this, and you'll get a copy of this anyone that registered will get a copy of this. But if you've got a question, stick it in the chat panel and I'll see it. Okay, oh, someone's just arriving. Or you can unmute yourself, like I say, if you think it's just too long, it's too long a question to stick into the chat panel. If you are using the chat panel, put it to everyone, not to me personally. Otherwise, people can't see your question and they don't understand what you've asked effectively. So what I'm going to do is not going to cover absolutely everything the examiner said, but talk about the major points that I think are the most relevant. We're going to talk about the syllabus changes. He made some comments about managing exhibits and requirements. I'll leave that a little bit, if you like, vague right now. What does that mean? I think traditionally people think, for an individual requirement, sort of, if you like, for there might be an exhibit matching with it, and he's commenting on that. He doesn't like that attitude, so we'll talk about that in a minute. Secondly, we're going to talk about spreadsheet calculations. How should you do them slightly better? Yeah, and what sort of comments did he make? Thirdly, the importance of knowledge. I mean, that's particularly, I think, relevant if you're exempt at it. Anybody exempt from F2, as used to be called F2, now called management accounting, or F5, which was the baby paper to this, called the performance management. Anyone exempt? Stick it in the chat panel. Let's have a see what we've got. Are you worried about being exempt? Should you refuse your exemption? God forbid, don't do that. You got an exemption, I would definitely take it, even though you have got to pay for it. Yeah, so Nicole's saying exempted. Ritu, exempted performance management. Yeah, Gathri, yes, exempt. And it'd be almost likely, I think, that you'd be quite worried about that to some extent. I mean, you've got to take the exemption, haven't you? Of course you have. Yeah, and it's nice to get, isn't it? Even though I think you have to pay for them, don't you? Yeah, that's really cheeky, isn't it? But what's the importance of knowledge? And should you be worried about that? And what do you do? What do you do about that? Do you buy performance management material? And I'll talk about that when I get there. Because it is a worry. You need to know about fixed cost. You need to know about variable cost. You need to know about profit, contribution, break even, net present value. There are some things that the examiner just expects you to know, and I'll talk about that when I get there. I'm going to talk about these three things because this is really important. What did the examiner say about application? We know this is an application-based exam, surely. It's a high-level paper. Evaluation, oh my word, is the examiner obsessed with that? So we're going to talk about that and why he's obsessed with that, so you understand that. And justification. In other words, if you look at all that to some extent, it's more the why of something than the what of something. The examiner is very interested in making sure that you do genuinely understand and ask those sorts of questions. He highlighted a few weak areas and said, these are going to come up in the future. So let's have a look at that. Let's talk about what are those weak areas. And therefore, certainly, I think if you're doing the exam in September or December, I'd be worried about that. And I'm going to tell you what he said and which subjects in particular you need to be concerned about. And then, one or two, what was quite useful actually, what the examiner did was give you some real exam answers from the last sitting. Talked about why something was a good answer, why something was a bad answer. It's a bit like the examiner's reports to some extent. Yeah, and also he made a comment about subheadings in mainly, I suppose, the case study, but you might use subheadings elsewhere. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. Well, the good news on the syllabus changes, I'm not going to give you them all because most of them are irrelevant. They're pretty minor. Hooray! Yeah, and is there anything to particularly concern yourself with? A lot of the syllabus changes are just moving things around or providing a little bit of context or putting something in a different part of the syllabus because of that context. Who cares? I mean, I just think that's completely irrelevant. The two things that I would stress is, first of all, there is this inflow and outflow analysis included or added to EMA, Environmental Management Accounting. I was pleased with that because, to be honest, I thought that was examinable anyway, really, because it's so similar to flow cost accounting. Inflow outflow analysis, I could teach you that in 30 seconds. Are you ready? Inflow-outflow analysis is the idea in environmental management accounting, is that if you put in materials or labor into a process, yeah, where does it go, right? And measure that in quantity, not value. So we might well have some finished goods, 80 kilos. Yeah, we might have some losses of, let's say, 15 kilos. We might have some spoiled items of, let's say, 5 kilos. And the idea of inflow and outflow analysis, yeah, is to try and account completely for everything that goes in, both in terms of materials and in terms of labor. And so essentially what they're doing, I think, is saying, look, it's not about value environmental management accounting. It's about loss and waste. Because I suppose quite a traditional accountant, and I'm a commercial person. So if there is waste, am I worried about it? Well, I'd be worried about it only if really it's costing me a lot of money, or I would act on it if I could make a commercial success of that waste. So if I could recycle cardboard and make it a perfectly acceptable new box for less, then I'm interested. But if I can't, I'm not interested, and I'll throw it away. And that is bad. It's a bad attitude for the environment, isn't it? And most of you be a lot younger than me and wouldn't take that attitude. And inflow-outflow analysis ignores the value, yeah, and just says, look, what are we not getting out as finished items in volume terms, and then encourage you, if you like, to be concerned about it. And that's it. I mean, you might measure these as percentages. We lose 15%, we spoil 5% of my figures, and then they'll become key performance indicators. That's it. That is it. Inflow outflow analysis done. Right. So not concerned about value, more concerned about volume. Okay. Secondly, and the only other, I think, important change in the syllabus, because the rest of it is just a bit irrelevant, was the introduction and the emphasis on sustainability. And you can see why that is. We all know about that. Yeah. He actually specifically said this will be examined more often. That's coming. Yeah. And it could even come this September. Sustainability. In my view, having thought about it for a little bit, I think it's likely it would be a KPI type question. How could you measure sustainability? Or it might give you a KPI and ask you, is this an appropriate measure of sustainability? Yeah, and if I ask the question, how can it be measured? You can't answer that question without a context. Somebody earlier was asking about, what does context mean? Context is just a specific area of a business or a specific type of business where the topic is being examined. That sets the context. That's what context means. So if I said, for example, and I'm going to ask you a question here, and you need to be brave and stick something in the chat panel. If I was a house builder, yeah, and I'm thinking about KPIs in the sustainability world, what kind of KPI could you choose? Okay, I'm going to give you a second to think about that. You might not have time to write it down, admittedly, but this is the context. So this is the scenario that you've got to, apply yourself to: house builder and sustainability. I mean, sustainable materials, yeah, would be, not things like hardwoods, which take hundreds of years, if you like, to grow and but a second to cut down. Softwoods are much more sustainable because they can grow much quicker, for instance. Yeah, or something that requires an awful lot of resource to make isn't very sustainable. It's something that we can't dispose of very easily. That's the problem with plastics. Plastics were a brilliant invention. I mean, I remember plastics coming along. When I was a kid, we had wooden toys, and then all of a sudden plastics started to appear. And the problem with plastics is they just don't biodegrade. Yeah, and Nimesh is saying there, degradable material used to build. Yeah, and that's the right area. It might not be a KPI, Nimesh, but it's the right area of the right way of thinking. So I would say, for example, something like this, that if you're looking at the percentage materials used from sustainable sources, yeah, so if I've got If I say I'm using, oh, I don't know, 8% sustainable materials in a build, maybe that's not enough, and that should be pushed up, to a target of 18% over a period of time, and that would be a reasonably sensible, wouldn't it? KPI in that area. That improvement, I think, of the amount of sustainable materials is the way that I would tend to go with that. Or you could do, I don't know, carbon footprint per square meter of new house build. It's quite an interesting idea. Yeah, that's looking at, the output, which is nasty, per product, isn't it? New houses build. Or you might say the percentage of material wasted per house. Maybe waste isn't sustainable. So taking a broad definition. I quite like Nimesh's other idea here, energy efficiency. Yeah, again, what you need to do, Nimesh, is actually create a KPI, but I'm sure you can do that. If I ask you for a KPI, then you've got to give a measurement. Yeah. If I ask you for an area, what you're doing is giving me areas. Yeah. Cheap versus solid, Saab. I don't know what you mean by cheap versus solid, to be honest. And that is a problem, isn't it? Generally speaking, you might work in the industry, you might know what those things mean. I don't know what's a solid material. Is that concrete? Is that wood? So be very careful with your communication. Make sure that what you're saying is understandable by other people. Yeah. So to my mind, be concerned about sustainability. You'll probably find that these things are mentioned. Oh, someone's arriving. Hold on. These things are mentioned in the textbooks, but probably what will have to happen is that the textbooks will have to improve their sort of explanation of sustainability as a thing. Yeah, and unfortunately, the likes of the Kaplans and the BPPs, they produce a textbook every year, and Kaplan, I know, has just updated their textbook, so it won't, if you like, be easy for them to change that. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to produce another little sort of subject in my revision course for this September on sustainability. Haven't done so yet because this week's been chaotic, but I will certainly be doing that pretty soon, probably early next week. Yeah, that's the good thing about the direct access market that I represent, and FME in particular. The tutors write their own materials. It doesn't take me long to write something. Just need to do a bit of research and write something. So that'll come out. Yeah. Can't buy it separately, I'm afraid. No mechanism for that, but if you want to buy a revision course, it'll be in there. The examiner did stress, in terms of syllabus changes, the technical articles. I think what will happen, is that the ACCA website will include technical articles on sustainability pretty soon. So, do have a look at that pretty soon. Yeah. Are these syllabus changes in your tuition, Nimesh? In my tuition, yes. And no, not really. Sustainability is part of environmental management accounting. It's covered, and KPIs are covered. So Nimesh, what I'll probably do is I'll have to respond to this, yeah, and produce something probably for revision, probably. They only announced this last week, so it's very difficult to respond immediately. It's only 5 days ago, but I will do. Certainly have something for September. Now, let's talk about managing exhibits and requirements. Yeah, if the examiner thinks that the switch towards CBE has encouraged people to think in a way that they don't like. In other words, requirement question number 1 and exhibit number 1, people are tending to sort of see them as completely linked. And I've said to say that's their own fault. They've done that. Yeah, and increasingly it looks like that. But what he's suggesting, unfortunately, is that there might be something in exhibit 2 that relates to question number 1. And that's a real pain. It might not be much. In my opinion, you could find that 95% of what you need to answer question 1 is in exhibit 1. Yeah, and only a small comment in exhibit 2 will relate to question 1, and most of exhibit 2, if you like, will relate to question 2, if I've explained myself clearly. And he's just warning people that you really should read all the exhibits, yeah, and to my mind, you should read all the requirements before you start. And that's going to be a bit of a change for some people, I think. I mean, you reflect for yourselves for the moment. You can put a note in the chat panel. Do you read everything before you start, or do you just read question 1 and exhibit 1 before you start? And in the case study, for example, what do you do? And what the examiner is suggesting, unfortunately, that you need to read all the requirements and you need to read all the exhibits before you do anything. And I think people are going to find that, a challenge. And he's basically being quite unapologetic about it. He's saying you must be able to handle information. It's part of the test of an exam. Oh dear. So my suggestion then, therefore, is that you may need to plan and consider all requirements and all exhibits before you start typing. Yeah, now I've already responded to this before anybody asks me. In my revision material for this September, there's a demonstration of how to plan using a question called ROAN, ROAN. And that's in my September material already. The other possibility, I think, is what you could do is recognize, because most people are doing CBE, is anybody doing paper? Perhaps in the chat panel you could indicate if you are doing a paper-based. Most these days are doing CBE, aren't they? But if you're doing CBE, I think that's a bit of a benefit, isn't it? Because I suppose you could amend your answer as you go along. You know what I mean? So because 95% of the information you need to answer question 1 is in exhibit 1, you can write it, and then as you read exhibit 2, you might see, oh, there's something else there. Yeah, that might be useful. Now, I know that's contrary to what the examiners want you to do, but some people, I think I'm right in saying, I'm sure I'm right in saying, struggle to handle a lot of information, before they start, and do fall into this habit, of looking at question 1 and then just reading exhibit 1. And Nimesh, I think you're right. It's the reference in the requirement, isn't it? Yeah, that's doing that. And Shaheen, you're right. Yeah. Each exhibit is only for relevant parts A, B, C, or D. I think that was the original intention. And the examiner is just, I think, pulling some information from exhibit 1, into exhibit 2 a little bit. So just be careful. I don't think it's serious. But it's just something to be aware of. And just by way of illustration, this is a question called Bazille, from the March-June specimen paper in 2018, or sample paper they call it, don't they? I do find that hugely frustrating that they don't publish the March paper, they don't publish the June paper. They just take 3 of the questions out of the 6 questions in the March and June paper and produce a sample paper. Why do they do that? It's really irritating, because it means I don't know then what's come up exactly, more than anecdotally in a particular exam. And I find that really irritating. But there we are. That's what we're dealing with. Yeah. So you look at this question, for example, evaluate whether a VBM approach is appropriate for Bazille. And again, there's that reference to application and context. It's not whether VBM is good thing. It's whether VBM is appropriate for this business. And more on that a bit later on. Now, answering that question, if you just read that question and answered it, you might say something like, well, the performance measurement system that they use might not support a change to value-based management. And that would be a perfectly reasonable thing to say. However, if you then read part B says what change will be needed in the performance measurement system, and the performance management system, should VBM be adopted? So you can sort of see, I think, that if you started talking about performance management systems in A, you might find yourself in B thinking, oh, damn, I've talked about that in the wrong place. And that's a simple illustration, I think, I hope, of why you need to look at each all requirements. Do you do that? And I think you need to do that. At the very least, I think you need to read all the requirements before you start, at the very least, so you don't, if you like, mess up your planning of a question and talk about something in part A that should really be in part B. In fairness, the examiners have always said that if you did do that, they would give credit within A for stuff that should really be in B. But there's a limit to the tolerance of that, I think. And I would rather, if it should be in B, you should put it in B. Yeah. And by the way, can you see here, performance measures, right? Excuse me. Performance measures, yeah, as distinct from performance management system, as distinct from performance. Are you clear about the distinction between performance measures, performance management system, and performance? It's a big problem in APM, in my opinion. And so again, that's why, a bit of a teaser, I'm afraid here, there is a module for that on my September course, my revision course, because I believe that that's a confusion, and some people put something in performance measures that perhaps shouldn't be there. It's a big issue, so I've got a module for that just in case you're worried. Let's talk about spreadsheets. Spreadsheets, what the examiner is moaning about a little bit, yeah, what the examiner is moaning about a little bit is that spreadsheets should be seen by you as more than just a numerical, more than just a numerical working, particularly in question one, if you like, the report, the big case study. I think too many people don't see it, if you like, as an appendix to a report and see it as a wee little calculation that you're doing. And he's got upset about it. In other words, what he's trying to say is that you should see the spreadsheet as a document that's going to go to the client. This is not good news, is it? Because that means a little bit more work, and time management is always a problem. And you need to weigh up whether it's worth dotting the I's and crossing the T's and giving a heading, and I'll make some suggestions in a minute. Is it worth that extra time compared to doing part C of a question? I mean, there's no doubt that time management is a challenge, isn't it, for a lot of people? But what he's suggesting is that when you do a spreadsheet calculation, there should be a title. It should be explained. Yeah, you should draw conclusions along with any reservations on the spreadsheet as opposed to in the report. And in many ways, I think that's probably more efficient. Because if you don't do that, yeah, you're going to have, first of all, you confuse your reader. If I give you a spreadsheet that has no explanations and no headings, you don't even know whether it's a number or a percentage, no conclusions, no reservations, the marker doesn't understand what you've done. What you've got to remember, I think, with exams and with APM in particular, is you are trying to communicate with somebody and they've got to understand what it is that you're saying. Yeah, so if you look at, just by way of illustration, this is a spreadsheet answer that I produced for my answer on my course called Soup Rail Services. Soup Rail Services is a train business, and the examiner provided some data, which is pretty much on the screen. You have to do some calculations to get these figures, and you had to analyze the data to ask the question: are the trains overcrowded? You might remember this question, you might not. It's a good question, actually, and it's on my, I think Soup Rail Services is in my September revision course. Yeah. And you look at this, I mean, what do you think about this? Well, it's pretty neat, isn't it? I've got route A, route B, total. I've got headings down the left-hand side. I've got a little calculation and a conclusion. And if you sort of look at the sort of points that I've made here, yeah. First of all, there's a good use of titles, I think. I'm using seat capacity, for instance. Yeah. I'm doing a sensible calculation with a decent heading. What you needed to do here was work out capacity utilization. Yeah, the capacity is, if you like, is here 1960, and the utilization, the occupancy of the seat is at 2,500. So they're overcrowded. That means people are standing up. I appreciate you're not familiar with this question, but if you did look at Soup Rail Services, that would help. suppose. Thirdly, yeah, I've drawn a conclusion, yeah, that actually it does look like the overcrowding only occurs on route A at peak times, because you can see these numbers here, which is capacity utilization. It's only this one that's over 100%. So people are stood up then, and the rest of the time, everybody's sat down. Yeah. And lastly, sorry, that's disappeared under the chat panel, so I can't see it. Hold on a minute. My last point. Oh, it stands alone, isn't it? Yeah, I've actually got a little conclusion. Yeah, at the bottom. That if you gave that to somebody, assuming that they understood what Suit Rail Services did, admittedly, I don't need to do anything else. And that, if you like, is what you're aiming for. Yeah, as opposed to what the examiner's suggesting. What happens is people, if you like, just do this bit. They just do it as a working, and then the marker doesn't really understand what the numbers are and doesn't really understand what you've done, and the examiner's fed up with it. So I don't know what he'll do about that in terms of marking guides and the number of marks, but I don't think anything. I don't think he's going to start penalising people particularly, but it is worth remembering that a spreadsheet is more than just a numerical calculation. Just bear with me, I would take a drink. Okay. Next point. Knowledge, and by the way, I don't just mean knowledge coming forward from F2 and knowledge coming forward from F5. I don't just mean that. Yeah, from the management accounts and the performance management is, stuff that demonstrating knowledge. What the examiner's saying is that that's really worth no more than 20 and rarely more than 20%. This exam, yeah, is more about application, yeah, more about justification, more about evaluation, synthesis, if you like, than pure knowledge. Now, that's a real problem for certain educational environments. I'll say it like that. There's a few people here from India, for example. Do you think it's fair to say that your educational environment in India is knowledge driven? I don't mean the ACCA particularly, because you've all taken the same exam. But in the past, you might have been encouraged to learn everything, and good marks, if you like, are gained from writing it down. Is that fair? I'm not necessarily picking up on India here, but I've done some teaching around the world, as I mentioned, and I know that's true. I mean, clearly things might change a little bit here and there over time, but you've got to recognize that knowledge isn't that important. Yeah, the problem that the examiner just wanted to stress is it does tend to underpin everything else. If you're trying to do a question on ABM, but you don't understand activity-based costing, that underpinning knowledge isn't there, you won't be able then to evaluate whether ABM should be introduced or could be useful in a given situation. So knowledge is important, but it's not examined. Yeah, you won't get many marks for demonstrating pure knowledge, but you need it to be able to answer the questions. Yeah, so but nonetheless, don't ignore your basic knowledge. It is important. Yeah, both from within the APM syllabus here and from F2 and F5. Yeah, where exemptions are a problem. What do you do about it? Well, what I'm not suggesting you do is go off and buy a management accounts book or a performance management textbook. Yeah, I decided when I wrote my material that maybe the best thing for me to do is to look at F2 and to look at F5 and decide for myself what I thought was examinable in APM. So, and include it within my tuition material and within my revision material. So it's there. So it's a one-stop shop, if that makes sense. Yeah, so I've got all this stuff in there, how to budget, treatment of overheads, profit calculations. You'd be astonished how often that comes up. What's a contribution? We have seen one break-even calculation, but it's really minor. And the examiner's really fair. If it is break even, it would be dead easy. It would be dead easy. You know, we got fixed costs of 5,000. Yeah, we make contribution per unit of 10, and therefore we need 500 units to break even. I mean, come on, at the higher level of exam, you should be able to do the basic stuff. He's almost saying, I think, with this, that any accountant needs to have the basic calculations. You need to understand fixed costs. You need to understand variable costs. Target costing is examinable. He's hinted at that. Yeah, and I have to say I responded to that quite recently. And there's another module on target costing in my revision material for September and obviously December and so on. Can you do a basic NPV? Would be very basic. It would be very basic. Yeah, IRR, less common, I have to say. Have seen it occasionally. Do you know what margin of safety is? I mentioned break even again for some reason. And then basic ratios, he complained about people's inability to work out liquidity ratios. And you know, it's just so basic, isn't it? It's management accounting. It's F2. It's even F3, isn't it? It's the really baby stuff. Can you work out, you know, debtor days or receivable days, you'll call them, won't you? And if you can't, well, you need to be able to do that. You know, it's not directly examinable within APM, but it, you know, oh, sorry, I just disturbed my camera. It does come up, not in a major way, and always very simple. He complained that people couldn't work out cost of sales. I mean, come on, what? Yeah, so these basics are, he's unapologetic about it, and you need to be careful. Okay, I've just check. I'm just reading the comment from Rita here. Most marks were not rewarded if not written the same as in the book, even if the spirit is the same. How do you know that, Rita? I'm not sure I agree with that. I've been an ACCA marker and I've been a CIMA marker, and that they're always told be reasonable and be fair about it. So I think you should trust the marking system to be reasonable. You know, they really do try to give people credit, because if you don't believe that, then you are in trouble. You just believe it's, you know, a conspiracy against you, and it's not. Oh, I see, in other Indian courses. Richard, that was quite important distinction. In ACCA, I honestly believe that they're pretty reasonable. Application is absolutely vital, you know. And again, I'm not going to sit here today and tell you how to apply yourself all the time, but you know, this is what the examiner talked about, and I'm going to give one thing away, because I do have a module on application skills on my courses, a specifically taught product, you know, because a lot of tutors say you must apply yourself, but then don't tell you how to do it. So I exercised my mind about 6 months ago and thought, well, how do you apply yourself? And I'll give you one thing. Yeah, what the examiner said, and this is part of my little module, is that most of the questions are what I call seeded with specifics. Yeah, and you must use these. I'll give you an example for this in a second. Textbook answers are just not good enough or even acceptable. Right. So if I say to you, should a particular business use activity-based costing? Yeah, you can't write it out of the book. ABC advantages, ABC disadvantages. Nope. You've got to apply yourself to the scenario, and the scenario is full of specific mentions, specific things. Yeah, so it might say something like in ABC, it might say the business's IT system is really weak and most calculations are carried out on a spreadsheet. Right, so should this business go into ABC? Well, that'll be very difficult without substantial investment in that IT infrastructure, won't it? And that's the distinction between, if you like, a non-applied answer and an applied answer. So when you're reading the questions, look really hard for the specifics that I mentioned. Yeah, there's other ideas, yeah, but that's the one giveaway effectively today. There's all sorts of things I could tell you, but the examiner remains vexed, if you like, that he doesn't want textbook answers. Don't. If I said to you, what are the pros and cons of ABC in this scenario, some of the standard ABC disadvantages might not be applicable. You've got to be careful. And what you've got to do is, when you're reading the question, is pick up the specifics and comment on them. Yeah. So you're trying to pick up the specifics. Yeah. And then what you're trying to do is add value and comment upon them somehow. And certainly in my courses, I talk about that. Let's just talk about evaluation, because again, in the session last week, he was vexed and concerned about this. He thinks it's an absolutely critical skill. Why does he think that? Well, and that's important, right? There's a magazine article which I wrote in August 2020, and it's in PQ magazine or in the issue.com magazine. You can look it up, or you can ping me and I'll send you a copy of it, right? Where I talk about and where I think he's coming from. The examiner's view, I think, is that a lot of accountants in industry are turning out or churning out the same management reports, doing the same things that they've always done, even though the environment is shifting. I mean, you look at what's happened in 2020. Yeah, the vast majority of people now are working from home, and yet the performance management system won't yet have been amended to reflect that in all cases. And so that's why he's examining this thing called evaluation. He wants you to be able to evaluate a process, a system, an approach, a method of calculation against an existing context. Is it appropriate to do what we're doing? In other words, he's not so much examining the what of something, he's examining the when of something. Yeah, so he's not examining what incremental budgeting is or what this is. He's examining when should you use it. It's a question, if you like, of suitability. Yeah, and you absolutely must be able to do that. Evaluation is it is a critical skill. It's the most used verb. And certainly when students are doing exam questions in my revision courses, I'm very concerned about the situation. Can they evaluate something? There's a student on my course last time called Fiona, who had been told they weren't allowed to express an opinion in an exam and had learned from the textbook and was just all at sea with this thing called evaluation. Yeah, and an evaluation is not so much saying whether something's good or bad. Yeah, it's saying, why is it good or bad? Yeah, you got to explain the journey that you came on to reach the conclusion it was good or bad. Yeah, look at my YouTube channel. Can you be right but not score marks? There's a little 3 or 4 minute video. Can you be right but not score marks, which talks about this. Okay, so an evaluation is what made you think it's good or bad. It's not a statement of it's just good or it's just bad. Why? The reasoning, the justification is absolutely obsessed with it. So you can be right and say it's good and just not score because you've not told me why you think it's good. Yeah, or bad. Examiner's very interested in a balanced approach. Does that make sense? Application and evaluation, really important, and the examiner stressed it earlier last week. So you've got to spend time on it. You've got to get to grips with application skills, and you've got to get to grips with evaluation skills. And by the way, I would do that whilst you're studying. So, if you're looking, for example, at a pest analysis in your tuition course, wherever you're going for tuition, yeah, I'll bet you that the majority of people are concerned about that. What is it? Yeah, not that or that. Yeah, when and why. Is it any good? Do I like it? Is it useful? Can it be used as a performance management system? And I don't really give a monkey's about what. Not interested. How can you not know what a pest analysis is? It's whether it's any use to us in a performance management environment. And the problem with a pest, it's just a list of letters full of exogenous variables, variables that are outside of our control. So setting performance targets in a pest environment is actually quite difficult to do. So it's forming an opinion. Opinions are critical, in my opinion. Yeah. By the way, just to conclude that evaluation point, a conclusion can be mark earning. If I say to you, is activity-based management useful in this situation? You can go through the arguments, yes, because, and no, because, and then reach a conclusion to balance the view. That's a mark earning point. The examiner expressly said so. Yeah, so being right in the end, if you like, can score you a mark. Yeah, just by way of illustration, this is a question called the Estland police force, yeah, which asked you to evaluate the method of calculating and measuring the force's scores in the league table and achieving the Department of Interior aims and goals. Right. Yeah, so it's an evaluation question. Yeah, and it was a league table system. You had to evaluate a league table system. And do you think the method of that they adopted was good or bad? And that's what he was trying to do. And there was lots and lots of specifics in the question that would help you. You know, the calculations were shown, the choice of the measures was shown, the weightings between the calculations were shown, and all these specifics will help you in the mission of evaluation. You know, so for example, I think in the league table, the speed of answering the phone by the police was one of the 4 measures, right? And what you can do is question whether that was a good measure. It was weighted equally with all the other measures, including things like crime solution. Do you think that's a good idea? And it's all about adopting this questioning approach. Is that the way that you do it? Is it right? And this is, I think, at the heart of why APM is difficult, because there isn't a right answer. There's no IFRS to rely on. There's no tax rule to lean on. There is only opinion. Yeah, is answering the phone important enough to count to 25% of a league table score for a police force? No, I don't think it is. Why? Well, it's relatively minor. Speed of answering the phone is comforting to customers. I think that's probably true. Yeah, if it's a crime that's being reported in a 999 thing, they need to respond quickly, and therefore there's a better chance of catching the criminal. But answering the phone quickly at a local police station, I mean, who cares? So what? Yeah, you might be ringing up inquiring about what's happened in the past, and you got an inquiry. People sometimes take a while to answer the phone. It's easy to say yes, it's important. Can you see? You've got to have an opinion. And interestingly, if you free yourself up and say to yourself, there isn't a right answer here, this exam gets a lot easier. As long as your comments are valid. Yeah. Weak areas. These things are coming up. Maybe not September. I wouldn't rule it out. All of these are in my courses. He thinks we're rubbish at lean systems. We don't really know what they are. If you don't know what they are, you better start looking it up. ABM, activity-based management. I think that's quite common that people are not very good at that. They're good at ABC potentially, or they might not have the underpinning ABC, which is why they're not very good at ABM. Value for money, which is a real surprise to me. Value for money has been around since 1982 or something. It's ancient, and it's super. Economy, efficiency, and effectiveness, right? So you need to be good at it because he's going to examine it. Value-based management, there's an article on that, which is really good. ACCA article. To be fair, there's ACCA articles on all these things. Yeah. So he specifically said these are areas that he thinks the students are weak. And I think that means he's going to test them again and again. I remember being the PM examiner. I set a question on linear programming. It was dreadfully done, in my opinion, People all avoided part C of the question, never got to part C, and I was disappointed. So I set another question on part C only. So what happens in an exam influences an examiner's thinking for future. It does. These are coming up more often, so you better get ready. Yeah, I'm a little tight on time here. I'm just going to skip over this. It'll be in the handout. Yeah, but I'll just talk about one more thing about the examiner gave two examples. That one I've just skipped across because I'm running short on time, and this one on DIA called answering the question. And I'll just talk about this one rather than the last one. These were just two examples at the end of the session where the examiner was saying, look, these are examples of good answers and bad answers. And this second one, I think, was the best one. So I'll just focus on that because my timing's, I'm running tight. The examiner illustrated a question called DIA, which I think was Department of Internal Affairs. And this was very recent, September and December 20. Some of you may have seen this question, I don't know. It concerned the policing of people in D-land. He often sets questions based in F-land and D-land and C-land and so forth. And it was the CSFs and KPIs for this police force, again, that were under review, okay? And what the examiner asked for was a justification for the changes that had been suggested for the CSFs. It's that first bit that we're going to be looking at. So what the examiner did was give us old CSFs and new CSFs and said, could you justify the changes? So clearly what you'd have to do is read the old, read the new, and spot the differences. Protecting and supporting those at risk from harm became greater protection and more support for those at risk from harm. I mean, that looks just easy to me. What they're trying to do is saying, why are we stressing improvement? And why would you stress improvement? Maybe because it's going wrong at the moment, and maybe we should never stand still in a performance environment. You should always be striving continuous improvement, a Japanese sort of type philosophy, and that's all he wanted. Yeah. Now, what the examiner then did was put this on the screen. This was a real student, apparently, in a good way, and this answer gets 4 marks out of 4 marks. It's a 4 out of 4 answer. And what this answer has done is answered, first of all, a justification for the changes suggested, and then a justified recommendation for a KPI. So you have to justify the changes suggested and then recommend the KPI justified. And there was some bad news here actually in the second part. Yeah. And you know, if you read this, I think it's a pretty good answer. You can see why it scores. These ticks, by the way, are CBE marking ticks. So what happens is when the mark comes along, they'll click in an area, click, and then give it a mark, click, and then give it a mark. Yeah, and all the basic is saying is the advisor wanted to emphasize greater and more because the government has previously failed to protect and support those at risks. Now, I personally, I would have gone on to say, you know, the other reason that they've changed this is to emphasize this continuous improvement concept. But this particular student said, by adding these words, the shift to other more specific KPIs are being highlighted, and you know the police force will be assessed based on how it better protects those at risk from harm. So they're sort of saying the same thing as me, but I would have used the words continuous improvement, and those 2 points get you those 2 marks. And then, and this is the bit that I found interesting, yeah, a justified KPI, there is the KPI, population divided by the number of police officers. So how many police officers are at service? The point is that what the student did was explain the KPI, linked it to the better point, and therefore scored the 2 marks. And he also said that if you just gave the KPI alone, you wouldn't score anything. A justified KPI, if you give only the KPI, he said he wouldn't give you any marks. Oh dear. That was new. First time he's actually said that. So there's the KPI. This KPI will show how many police officers are at service for a certain group of citizens. There is a huge difference, for example, between 1 police officer for 1,000 and 1 police officer for 500. The higher the number of police officers per 1,000, the better protected, and there's the link to better, those would feel. And the officers would have more time to deal with their problems. It's a good answer. It's a proper justification for the KPI that they're suggesting. But I would wager an awful lot of people give the KPI and then downplay the justification. And that's just not good enough. So what I want you to do is think about that the justification is, if you like, more important than the KPI itself. Just reflect on that. And then lastly, the use of subheadings. It's very tempting, isn't it, in the CBE? It's very tempting in the CBE to cut and paste the requirements into the report. And indeed, many tutorial organizations have suggested that, and I think I do as well. But he's saying he just wants you to tidy it up a little bit. So in the DIA question that I've just referred to, yeah, the question said that part 1, write a report on the critical success factors and key performance indicators. If you cut and paste that into your answer, yeah, with the 16 mark point, he's saying you must tidy it up. Excuse me. It's not a valid heading, because the question really asks for the reasons for the CSFA changes, and that should be the heading. And the recommended KPI was the other heading, and no mark indicator. In other words, cutting and pasting into the answer, yeah, is no longer really acceptable. You have to tidy it up to make it a sensible heading, because would you agree, this doesn't mean anything? Certainly in the environment of an embedded requirement, it doesn't mean anything. He was suggesting you ought to read your answer before you submit it and tidy it up, but I think that's personally a bit fanciful. How on earth have you got time to do that? But doing it right first time might be better. So I'm afraid there's nothing wrong with cutting and pasting into your word processor the requirement, but then when you produce your answer, you're going to have to produce meaningful headings. These two, would you agree, are meaningful headings, whereas this would not be. Does that make sense, everybody? Are you clear with that? So those are the 5 or 6 things that the examiner talked about last Monday or Tuesday in the conference. Yeah, and I'll give you a summary for them at the end. Obviously, all the tuition providers will say that they deal with these things, and I'm going to say the same. I will deal with these things. Yeah, I will deal with application skills. Yeah, I will deal with writing skills, including the use of headings. I will deal with reading questions and spotting specifics. I will give you practice. He talked about that. It was evident, he said, that people couldn't do and manipulate the CBE platform because a lot of tuition providers are not using it. And I think that's disgraceful. All my revision courses, all my revision questions are set on the practice platform, and not GetRogo, the ACCA's practice platform, because it's most similar, I think, to the practice platform, the platform that you use for doing your exam. Yeah, and that person that was worried about the performance hierarchy, I'll talk about that too. Yeah, if you're worried about performance management, and performance measurement, there's a module for it. So obviously, you know, courses cost money. I mean, I fully accept that, but they help you pass the exam. I mean, do bear in mind that, you know, you pay what, 150 quid to enter the exam, and it's 3 months at least out of your life. So I think it's a good investment rather than a cost. The way I do these things, if you just don't mind, you know, I've done a free session. I just want to talk about, yeah, Yeah, Shaheen's saying in another video about open tuition in last sittings, a tutor said to save time, copy and paste the requirement as headers. Well, the examiner's saying you can't do that anymore. The examiner's specifically saying you need to tidy them up. Okay, but what I do is an on-demand streamed video product. No traveling, no having to be there at a certain time. I don't do live sessions very much. I do one a session as an extra, but it's all streamed and on demand, which means you can pause it, you can watch it again, you can pause and think about it, you can pause it and WhatsApp me. It's like having a tutor in your pocket. The revision notes aren't cheap and cheerful. They are proper revision notes, 16,000 words, not like a pocket note type thing where you've got, I don't know, 1,000 words. To me, revision notes need to be understandable, not just headings. Yeah, so that they're long enough to give you the meaning, but succinct enough to read in 20 minutes. Yeah. And also what I tend to do is have a topic in 10. So at the end of every revision note, there's the 10 most important things that you must know. I think it's quite nice. Good for last minute revision, that, isn't it? The 10 most important things you just must know. Yeah, there are 16 past exam questions, all with my own answers, not the examiner's answers. The examiner's answers, to my mind, are just too long. Whether you agree with that? Do you think the examiner's answers are too long? They're massive, aren't they? How can you possibly produce an answer like that in 45 minutes? You just can't, can you? So I produce my own answers, and they're all video debriefed. Yeah, and 4 of them you can submit to me for marking. So Saab, you said earlier, you know, I think I might be paraphrasing, and I apologize if I've got this wrong because I only glanced at it. You might struggle to enunciate or explain what you mean about something. That's when you need marking, matey. It's not the mark, it's the feedback. Anybody here a waffler? Do you know why people waffle? There's 2 reasons why people waffle. They think there needs to be an introduction to everything they say. So they set the scene. And they have anxiety. It's a weakness. So they think they always think they haven't said enough. And those 2 things you need to get away from. You get one go at it and you don't give introductions. Yeah. And the methodology for this is something called edit. It's an edit technique. So you write something to me. If I think it's waffly, I'll ring you up. We'll have a quick 2-minute conversation, and then you'll have to submit it again with half the words. It's an edit technique, and it gets you to realize how you can say the same thing in less words. Obviously, you'll see that in my own answers. I mean, I write quite succinctly, but you need to be able to do it. And that's, you've got to tackle your own anxiety there. I haven't made that clear. I need to say it again. Disaster, absolute disaster, because you just repeat yourself. You've got to say it right first time. Okay. All these questions, these 4 questions can be submitted. All of them are on the CBE platform. You've got to practice the CBE platform. Really, really, really important. Don't do questions in Microsoft Word and Excel. Use the CBE platform, Test Reach. Don't do them on paper if you're doing the exam on CBE. Don't do that. Get used to it. Yeah. And, you know, my course includes skills. It's not, this exam, given its 80% application and 80% evaluation and 80% justification, isn't about knowledge. It's about skills. Yeah. So earlier I was saying, what's in my course? A lot of skills stuff. Do you know the difference between performance measurement, management, and performance? Because if you don't, you're in trouble. It doesn't matter how much knowledge you have about IT systems or how much knowledge you have about business structures. You won't be able to answer the questions. Skills is what you need to be able to do it. Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, I've got this demonstration of doing a question live. It's quite scary to do. So knowledge covered in the revision notes, application and evaluation covered, yeah, with other things that I do. Hope you don't mind me talking about that, but look, hey, it's a free webinar. I need to be able to say a few things about what I do. and hopefully, you know, one or two might want to buy into that. Yeah, and WhatsApp, my goodness me, that's a game changer. You got your phone on you right now, haven't you? Yeah. So have I. There's a WhatsApp message there from Shaheen, who's in this room. Yeah, we all carry our phones around. I carry my phone around. It's always with me. WhatsApp, complete game changer in terms of the level of support that you can get from a tutor. It's just unbelievably good. You get a question, 10 o'clock at night, you ping me. Even if I'm lying in bed, the phone is with me, isn't it? So the chances are you'll get a response either by a text or by one of, you know, these little voice messages. How good are they? I don't even have to type it down. You don't have to either. Yeah, it's useful to type it down because obviously other people can see it, but you can always listen to it. Yeah, I absolutely think WhatsApp is just brilliant. So what I use is you can WhatsApp me personally, or I set up a group, a WhatsApp group, and you ask questions and I answer them. Yeah, I'm the expert. I'll answer them. And so I provide that support 24 hours a day near it. I mean, gosh, if I'm awake, I'm doing it. Okay. So in summary from the examiner, you know, read the requirements and the exhibits, all of them. That's going to be tough. I'm not sure people will like that. Your spreadsheet should not be working. It's a standalone document. Think about your basic knowledge, particularly if you've got exemptions. I gave you a list of topics on the slide. You'll get the copy of the recording of this very shortly. I will not give out the presentation itself, but I will give you the recording. Practice, application, and evaluation. You might need help with that. How do you practice that on your own? That's why you need people like me. Get better at these key topics. That's a worry, I think. I don't think ABM and VBM and lean systems are very popular at all. I'm a bit surprised to see VFM there, but you know, make sure you address those before September. Cut, paste, and then amend, not just cut, paste. And good luck, you know, and reach out if you need me and you need me to help you. You know, I like to think I'm pretty helpful. Obviously, there's a limit to that. You know, you have to be a student of mine in the end to get technical help. I think that's entirely reasonable. But guys, the space course starts Monday. It's the soft launch, yeah, and then a hard launch the following Monday. The hard launch, we get into the topics. We start with performance hierarchy. We start doing questions. Soft launch this week, starting Monday, we just look at our skills. It's the things on that slide before. The soft launch concentrates on these things here, up to and including number 7. So next week, my students are going to be doing these things here. Learning how to apply themselves, learning how to read a question, learning how to write and set out an answer, learning the distinction between performance management, performance measurement. Before the following Monday, week on Monday, we start with a hard launch, you know, proper questions. Okay, look, I'm not going to disappear, but I am going to stop the recording. Excuse me. Oh, damn, I've gone too far. Hold on a minute, can I go back? No, I can't. I'm going to stop the recording, but I am prepared to answer your questions. All right, so I'll stop the recording now and then I'll stick around for a little bit. If you listen to this recorded, I'm sorry you couldn't make it. Do reach out to me. You've got my email address. You've got my WhatsApp number on the screen from before. Okay, goodbye.